Early on in your research career, especially if you start your research career by doing something like a PhD, you tend to be mostly an individual contributor working on one core, all-consuming project, and that is part of the fun of doing a PhD. If you stay in research or academia, what will tend to happen, not always, there are many career paths, is that you will tend to become a team lead or a group lead, or perhaps even the leader of a center or an institute, and you will suddenly be responsible for a much larger number of projects in parallel. One of the things that can be really challenging for individuals making this transition is the techniques that you use to make sure you completed your project successfully at the beginning of your career no longer work as well as you move up in seniority and the number of responsibilities you have. A great example of this is I'm going to work really, really hard in order to get this behind schedule project back on track and perhaps save the day for the project. And that does work occasionally as an individual contributor, but it does not scale. So when you are a leader of some sort of team and there's a number of projects in parallel that are competing for your attention, you can't just double down and work especially hard because there is a limit to the number of hours in the week. You are not superhuman, and that strategy will ultimately fail. Now, some people are pretty good at managing projects. They have the knack, but I would say the vast majority of us, and definitely myself included, it's a very steep learning curve for the first 10 or 20 years of your career even. You will make lots of mistakes, lots of minor mistakes that you learn from, and perhaps a few more significant mistakes, and it's all part of the learning process. So today's video is for people like myself who have occasionally struggled with project management, have found themselves having to commit far more time and emotional energy than was initially allocated to a project. And I'm going to share some tips that I've found and I've observed other people have found have really helped them keep projects as manageable as possible. Now, before the project even gets started, and indeed before you even are awarded or win the project, there are many things you can do to make your life easier, but two particular ones are, firstly, not under-speccing the resources and timeline for the project. So I'll talk a little bit later in this video around how people have a tendency to underestimate the amount of resources and how long a project will take. And part of dealing with this is making sure you specify plentiful resources and timelines to achieve the project. Really, unless you are a super experienced project manager, you should feel when you specify these resources that you are probably being a little bit excessive, because I can guarantee in almost all situations at the end of the project, it will not feel at all like you are excessive in allocating resources like salaries for research assistants or engineers and so forth. The second thing you can do in the lead up to a project, especially projects with partners like government or industry, is expectation management. And so what this involves is being fairly realistic about what you think you can and can't do, some of the hiccups or setbacks that you may face during the project, in order that they go into the project with a clear understanding of what is realistic, rather than being sold all sorts of unrealistically optimistic promises, which of course mostly are not going to come true. So the lead up to the project is very, very important, and doing these things correctly will make your life much easier on average. That said, once you actually get into the project, there are a bunch of things you can do to make your life a little less stressful as well. The first point I want to cover is plan Bs and pivots. So no project goes as planned. And one of the things that is drummed into you at various stages in your career is the need to have a plan B or a plan C or a plan D. And indeed, this is a good sentiment and a good thing to keep in mind. What I have observed in a lot of project management situations is that people preemptively put far too much time investigating the minute details of plan Bs, plan Cs, and plan Ds when they don't know for certain that these plans are even going to come into play. Obviously, this is a balance thing. You want to get the balance right. And the philosophy that I think is good here is that you want to investigate and flesh out the plan Bs, the plan Cs, and plan Ds to the point that they tell you whether your plan A is still the right course of action. And so you are sort of a little bit interestingly validating your core plan A, the path you'll follow if everything goes relatively well by investigating those plan Bs and plan Cs and plan Ds. And sometimes when you go into those details, you'll find that there's a major flaw in your primary plan. And that is really one of the core values of investigating those alternatives early on in the project, but don't go overboard. Another common mistake, in my opinion, that I see a lot of academics and research group leaders making is trying to kill all of their birds with one stone with a specific project. So as an academic or a researcher, there's probably a bunch of things you are interested in doing. You want to do interesting research, you want to publish papers, you want to get future grants, you want to train and nurture early career researchers like PhDs and postdocs. But the project, the specific project that you're working on, most likely does not have to fulfill all of those goals. It has a subset of those. And what I see people trying to do, which I understand why they're doing it, they're trying to be efficient, is they try and get everything they possibly can out of the project. But what that often does is it causes a lot of extra hassles. A great example of this is publishing. And so there are some projects you would do, especially in the commercial space, where publishing will be very difficult, not just because of IP considerations or sensitivities, commercial sensitivities, but also because the work you're doing is more applied and will ironically be a little bit harder to publish in journals and conferences in some fields. And so one of the things you can think about is you don't have to do everything within the core of this specific project. Think of the project as an enabler of those activities in all the peripheral activity that you string up around it, but not necessarily as part of the core project. Another thing to remember is if you make the project too complex and too ambitious, then you will be overwhelmed completely. And if you are overwhelmed, you're not going to be able to pursue all those other interesting things you want to pursue anyway. So a project that is running on time without a lot of stress will help you more than trying to cram all of the activities you want to do into the project itself. In terms of planning how long a project will take and how much resources it will take, both in the preliminary stage where you go up to propose the project, but also when you're actually running it, people, generally speaking, always underestimate the amount of time and the amount of resources and the number of setbacks that will occur. Now, early on in your career, this is completely understandable, but I see experienced people who've led lots of projects, and I fall into this trap as well, consistently underestimating the resources and the timeline and the setbacks. You will hear people saying stuff like, and this took much longer last time because of this setback. Someone had to leave the project, or we couldn't get this piece of equipment, and they act as if those are exceptions, but those events are almost never exceptions. They are the norm. And if you act with your new project as if it's magically going to be better than all your past experiences told you, you are in for a world of hurt. It might happen, but not very likely. So how do you deal with being more realistic about timelines and resources and how long things will take and the setbacks? Initially, a coping strategy you can use is just to be pessimistic. So to bake in extra margin, even though you are really confident that something will be fairly quick, into your deadlines and your timelines and your week-to-week project management. That is a rather blunt and crude approach, and ultimately it doesn't scale because you can't pad in enough time and resourcing to do this in a general way. So what you're really aiming for is to be realistic about how long different things will take. Some things will take how long you think they will, and some things will take 5 times as long. And becoming experienced enough to make those predictions with reasonable accuracy is a key aim for becoming an effective project manager. Researchers, especially academic researchers, often have a tendency to go down rabbit holes and really identify an area that they're particularly interested in and go really deep and narrow on that area. And that's an admirable virtue in fundamental research because that's how breakthroughs are made. But in project management, it's often counterproductive. You have a deadline, you have timelines, you have specific outcomes, and your aim is to not underachieve across any of those milestones and outcomes. If you overachieve but spottily and completely fail to fulfill half the other milestones of the project, your funding partners, your collaborators are generally not going to be happy. So learning to compromise, learning to not overachieve in one narrow area, but rather achieve sufficiently across the entire project is a key skill and a key sort of thing that people leading projects should become comfortable with. Another thing which sounds really obvious, but I see time and time again, is not recognizing, identifying, and most importantly, addressing problems early enough. So in an early career research context, this is not so much of a problem in fundamental research because you've got an interesting idea, the thing you tried didn't work, you're going to try something else and it's going to take you another 3 or 6 months. And this is very much part of, for example, the PhD process. You cannot afford to do this in a lot of projects, again, because of your deadlines and the need to produce outcomes. And so dealing with problems early, recognizing them and realizing you don't have that unended amount of time and resourcing to deal with them is really important. And again, not something that is innately familiar to a lot of people compared to their early research career experience. Dealing with problems early and indeed recognizing and identifying them means you have to absolutely have the right group dynamic. And this is something that is quite tricky to do, but is very rewarding when you can get it right. So the right group dynamic, at least from my perspective, is a group where people are very open, where people do not feel the need to overly justify why they did something a certain way, where people can be called out for making an understandable mistake, and everyone will continuously make mistakes in any slightly challenging project. Go straight to dealing with solutions, no particular blame game or anything like that. Basically normalizing a culture where people will identify mistakes or possible issues with their own work, with other people's works, and people don't feel the need to get defensive about it and people don't get blamed for it. If you can get that dynamic right, you can form a team, a project team that is very, very productive, literally a factor more productive and trusting of each other indeed than a team where those dynamics just aren't working. That is an incredibly important part of effective project management. In summarizing, I think some of the key themes I've seen in terms of bad project management and effective project management, this is one of the areas where I've seen people don't necessarily take the time to consciously analyze, forensically analyze what they've done in the past and think really deeply about what they could improve in terms of general processes moving forward. A great example of that is people continuing to be too optimistic about timelines and resourcing. The key here is to evaluate the processes you're using and abstract that a little bit from outcomes. So you can do everything completely right in a project and still have a bad outcome. So one of the benefits of having done a number of projects is you build up enough of a database of examples that smooths out some of the volatility where perhaps in one project you did everything right and it went horribly wrong, and in another project where you were negligent in multiple areas but it still ended up being a wild success. Those are obviously outliers, and what you're looking for is a stable set of processes and approaches to project management that will serve you well, that will ensure the projects are successful, and will ensure that you don't have to sacrifice your whole life in order to get the project over the line.